All right, got it. Done. Recording. Awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. I thought we were. So welcome all. We are, as I said, this is my second lecture here, and I'm really thrilled to be joining you all today. We have some great speakers lined up for us tonight. Those of you who came early got a little sneak preview. This is where our spring season is ending. It's wrapping up, right? Spring is almost done here. We've had an amazing birdathon, considering that we couldn't do quite what we have traditionally done. But we have restarted our field trip program, and that is a huge deal to me, and I think to everyone in our community. We've got about a half dozen trips scheduled so far for June, and we had one trip last weekend, and we have another trip tomorrow that sold out in minutes. So if you feel like we missed you on your opportunity for those, we apologize. We really wanted to have a kind of a quiet start, sort of so that we could work out some of the kinks in it. But so far, everyone has been good about not showing up without registering, and all the registrants have showed up. So that's one of the big deals, is that we are now requiring pre-registration, and so you have to go to our website, to our trip page, and that'll show up in the chat in a moment. And you can register online, so there are no drop-ins. We close the registrations the Thursday before the trip, and so if it's not sold out by then, that's when we stop. We have 15 people max at the moment. There may be some trips that are smaller even than 15 if the site doesn't sort of allow for social distancing of groups as big as that. So we know there's a lot of pent-up demand, and we know they're going to fill up fast. And we really appreciate that you all are being so flexible and patient with us. We're going to try to get as many people out in the field to enjoy birds this summer as we can. And we should look for some accessible birding trips for people of all mobility. You should look for maybe even a few new locations as we try to figure out what are the best places that we can get as many people out as we can. Our rules will probably shift as the guidance from the CDC and the state changes. But right now we are requiring that all participants in our programs wear masks, and we're asking you not to share equipment in keeping with current regulations. But as that changes, we hope to be able to change. So as I mentioned, Birdathon was a big challenge for us this year, but I think everyone did really amazingly, and the Christmas in May bird count was really a lot of fun. And we are celebrating our Birdathon with an event on Sunday at 7 p.m. So I hope that you'll join us. You can sign up on the Birdathon page on our website, and someone will post the link to that in the chat right now. No, I think I skipped it. I did this a little out of order. So the one piece of the Birdathon that hasn't concluded yet is our auction. And there are some really amazing items in our auction. My favorite is the felt sculpture of a baby osprey. And I saw a baby osprey in a nest this morning at Point Melati, and it looked just exactly like that felt sculpture. So that's really what they look like. They're amazing, beautiful creatures. So we want you to bid early and bid often, so that we can really raise some funds to protect birds across the Bay Area. We need your help to do that, and there's a great opportunity for you to take something fun home and support Birdathon.
Hey Gary, I can't talk. I'm on a Zoom. I'll call you back later.
We have there we go. So we are working with this spring with the National Audubon Climate Watch program. This is a nationwide program to look at how climate change is impacting birds. So it's actually twice a year. for a month. You go out and observe a particular set of birds in each area. So here in our region, I can't remember the full list of birds, but spotted towhee, I think lesser goldfinch, all the nuthatch species are on our list. Western bluebird, I think also. If you're interested, please contact David Robinson, who's coordinating this program for us, a board member and longtime volunteer. So he's coordinating that, and I think we have more information on this on our website. All right, travel. So we have a lot of really amazing trips that still have space left in them. One of the most exciting trip, which we only have 2 spaces left, is the Heart of Chile trip. This is actually Dawn Lemoyne, who is our travel program coordinator. She's an incredible volunteer who has put together this really rich offering of amazing trips to amazing places. And this is the trip that she's going on this next year. So there's reason enough to want to go, if nothing else. But it's a 3,000-mile long, country, Chile, and it has more, it doesn't have as many endemics as Colombia, but it's got a lot, and a lot of really interesting birds that are only found there. It's being led by Claudio Vidal, who is the founder of the Far South Expeditions, and it is a native Chilean. And you will get to see penguins, which again, I don't need to say any more. Penguins, sign up, there are 2 spaces left. But there are a bunch of other trips: Oaxaca, Ohio, Kentucky, the home of John James Audubon, Uganda, Namibia, and Botswana. That's one. If I could take one trip, that would be the one. Namibia and Botswana, Brazil, Madagascar. These are really all amazing places with amazing birds. Your travel, supports Golden Gate Audubon. It supports conservation efforts in these countries. So there's lots of reasons to travel with us. So for more information, check out the link in the chat to to our travel page, goldengateaudubon.org/travel with GAGAS. We could also put you to work. If travel isn't your cup of tea right now, you're not ready for that, come out and help restore habitat right here in the Bay Area. We are we started in San Francisco at the beginning of the year, and we've just now opened our first East Bay program. Will be in June 19th at the Martin Luther King Shoreline in Oakland. It's really an amazing place, and you can make a difference there just by spending a few hours helping us remove invasive plants. This isn't planting season, so we won't be planting right now, but we may be removing invasives, cleaning trash, clearing it up, just keeping it in good shape so that the wildlife can thrive there. That was my first day on the job. I went out to Heron's Head Park on the first Wednesday of the month. I had a blast. It was really a lot of fun, and we made a huge difference in just a few hours. So please join us for one of those events. Well, so I'm gonna, yes, thank you. We're just a quick preview. I'll mention this again at the end. But Eric Schroeder, who is the board president of Golden Gate Audubon and a very well-traveled birder, also part of our international travel desk, is going to be talking about the birds of Madagascar. It is actually, my parents were just there just before COVID, and they said it was really a remarkable place. So we'll learn more about the amazing bird life and the conservation issues that threaten them on June 17th with Eric. So please come back and join us then. All right, here we go. So hey, we've managed. I'm in pretty good shape. I gave us 15 minutes to cover all of our background information, all of the important events that were happening right here, and I've got 3 minutes to spare, which gives me plenty of time to introduce our guests tonight. Zoe Burr and Lidia D'Amico. Lidia is the Alcatraz Biologist for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which is a unit of National Park Service. Her area especially includes the monitoring and management of rare and endangered avifauna populations. That's a big word. Bird populations, all right? Included the endemic honeycreeper of Hawaii and the southernmost population of the northern spotted owl. Lidia is currently managing the waterbird colonies of Alcatraz Island through collaborative research efforts with the Farallon Institute, Point Blue Conservation Science, USGS, and the Audubon Society. Zoe Burr is a marine ecologist who specializes in seabird ecology in the context of oceanographic processes and food web dynamics. She completed a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology from the University of California at Santa Cruz, go Slugs, and an interdisciplinary Master of Science in Biological Oceanography at several collaborating Nordic institutions. I'm gonna have to ask you more about that, Zoe, sometime. Zoe has worked with the Farallon Institute to conduct research on the breeding ecology and disturbance of seabirds on Alcatraz Island and to study marine predator diet. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lidia and Zoe.
All right, thank you, Glenn. Very happy to be here to talk about the birds of Alcatraz. So I'll go ahead and get started first with my presentation and just give you an overview of the bird colonies of Alcatraz, a little bit of history of the island, and also what my job entails when it comes to the management of these diverse colonies. So I'll go ahead. All right. So as Glenn mentioned, Alcatraz Island is part of the National Park Service, and it falls under a special unit called the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. It's a really unique park because it's the largest urban park. It's a big network. The GGNRA extends through Marin County, and all the way south to the peninsula. It includes areas like Sweeney Ridge and Maury Point. So it's a very extensive park, and Alcatraz is just situated in the middle of the bay, which makes it a great hotspot for all the water birds and seabirds. So I'm going to transport you back in time. This photo on the right is one of the oldest photos of Alcatraz that we have available. So you can see it was prior to any development by people. And this view was taken from the San Francisco shoreline. So Alcatraz was initially discovered by Spanish explorer Juan Manuel de Ayala in 1775. And he named it La Isla de los Alcatrazes. And so Alcatraz comes from the Spanish word Alcatrazes, which means large bird, strange bird. So you can see even, you know, from this photo, there's a lot of white around the edge of the island, and that's an indication of the seabird population. So that's just a lot of guano. So, so yeah, when it was initially documented, it was known to have a lot of bird life on it. And the island is especially attractive for seabirds because as an island with no fresh water, there probably weren't any predators on the island. So it was a safe haven for the birds. And, you know, it's mostly rocky, and there was probably some sparse vegetation. So here's a closer look. Oops, go back. closer look of the island. So I'm not totally sure what the orientation of the photo is, but you can see those little black dots on the cliff face are cormorants. So we know that, you know, cormorants and other birds were occupying the islands well before people began occupying the islands. And so Alcatraz has a very rich history, a very layered history. A lot's happened on the island. This slide doesn't do it much justice, but I just wanted to provide an overview of some of the historical events that happened on the island and the major timeframes of the island. So Alcatraz was initially established by the US military as a fort. It was known as Fort Alcatraz, and it was part of a fortification system within San Francisco Bay that included Fort Point and Fort Baker. And so it was a strategic point within the bay where you could see anyone entering the bay, any ships entering the bay. So the military used that to their advantage as a fortification site. And then it was also used as a prison by the military, and some of the first prisoners on the island were Confederate soldiers from the Civil War. And so they had a hand in developing and building the island while they were serving time on the island. And then in 1934, it transferred from the military to what's, you know, most famously the federal penitentiary on the island. And so that's when the era of penitentiary started. And the prison closed in 1963, mostly due to cost efficiency. So it's an island, you have to bring resources to the island, and it just got really expensive. So the prison closed in 1963, and then it was basically abandoned for a long time. And then there was the Native American occupation, which lasted 19 months on Alcatraz in 1969. And that's the photo you see on the right. So that's also a very interesting history. Right now on the island, we have an exhibit that highlights that period of time on the island. And then in 1972, when the GGNRA was formed, it was transferred over to the National Park Service. So throughout that entire history, the island was occupied by people for about 120 years. And so with that, the development and the occupation of the island by people, the birds all but disappeared. So prior to transferring to the Park Service, there really weren't any records of the bird life on the island when it was a federal penitentiary. And so here's another historical photo. This is Fort Alcatraz, and you can see that the island was heavily fortified with cannons. And so the view on the right is looking at San Francisco. And yeah, I think a lot of the time was just, you know, spent maintaining the island and doing practice drills. I don't think this part of the country saw too much action during the Civil War. And so now coming to present day, we have a diverse population of seabird and waterbird species on Alcatraz. And I imagine many of these species probably occupied Alcatraz before the island became developed by people. And probably some were, are no longer found on the island, like brown pelicans or common murres, but we still have a pretty diverse range of species. And so since the island was occupied by people for about 120 years, I think starting in like the late 80s, early 90s, we started to see a lot of these populations coming back to the island. So probably, and our largest colony right now is the Brandt's Cormorants. So they're very, very numerous on the island. Let's see. And some of our newest residents include a pair of peregrine falcons that started nesting on the island last year. So one of the peregrines, her name is Laurentium. She's a banded female that came from the Cal campus on Berkeley. And then her mate is unbanded, but it's really cool to see that, one of the Cal falcons dispersed onto the island and is now calling it home. And right now we have them nesting on the island again, and they have chicks that have hatched. I haven't been able to get a proper number. It's hard to see into the nest cavity, but it's one of the cooler things that has happened recently. So that's very exciting to share. And so the biggest rookery we have on island is the Brandt's Cormorants, and they started coming back to the island in the early 90s. And so this rookery is the largest one of Brandt's Cormorants within the San Francisco Bay. And they also nest on the Farallon Islands. But Alcatraz is the only place within the bay that you'll find them nesting. So Alcatraz is a very important nesting site for this species of cormorant. And you can see that it's a very dense colony. This is just one of the sub-colonies, probably a couple sub-colonies in here. But yeah, this is just capturing a fraction of the colony. So they're quite numerous. And yeah, some of the species we have nesting right now include great blue herons. The pigeon guillemots like to nest in some of the old structure found around the island. This is a pigeon guillemot on an old, what looks like pipe or some sort of outlet, but you have all of these structures around the shoreline of the island that have deteriorated over time, and it's created great nesting habitat for some of these bird species. And so the pigeon guillemots love nesting in some of the old decayed remnants of the island, and it's really interesting to see them, occupying the space in this way. And the Western gull colony is also quite prolific on the island. They essentially nest everywhere on the island. One of the bigger sites is on the parade ground, which is closed seasonally to allow the gulls and other birds to nest, including black-crowned night heron and California gull. They have a small area that they occupy on the outer edge of the parade ground. And then the Brandt's cormorants are occupying every available surface that they can. So We spend a lot of time counting these birds and doing nest checks and just making sure that disturbance is minimal to the colony. And so these are some of the wildlife areas around Alcatraz. You can see that the Brandt's cormorants in blue, they occupy a big section of the western side of the island and portions of the southern part of the island. And the western gull colonies are, the bigger one is in the parade ground, and then there are some spaces underneath the water tower or in that back area. But they also like to nest on other surfaces, sometimes in the middle of the road. But yeah, the birds have really, you know, call Alcatraz home, and they nest in a lot of different locations, and it's also interesting to see how they've been able to occupy some of the old remains and rubble and buildings that are remnants of the island, and you know, it's transitioned into heron and egret rookeries, and yeah, they're just using that as nesting sites now. And on this photo on the right highlights the subcolony of the Brandt's cormorants that's overlooking an area called Barker Beach. And so that flat area was historically the trash incinerator when it was a federal penitentiary. And so that flat area has become a great nesting site for the birds. And so a lot of what I do in my position is disturbance monitoring. And with the help of Farallon Institute, we have an ongoing database of the types of disturbance and the degree of disturbance that we see happening on the island. Considering that Alcatraz is in a densely urban area, a lot of the disturbance that we see is anthropogenic, such as sailboats, other watercraft, aircraft. In this photo, you can see a visitor is walking through the colony. That area is normally closed to visitors during the breeding season. But you know, sometimes we have visitors who ignore the signage or who may not understand the rules clearly, and this person took it upon himself to walk through the colony, which caused a big disturbance and flushed the birds. So disturbance monitoring is one of the main activities that that I do. And so a disturbance is defined as, you know, anything that interrupts the bird's normal behavior. It can be something as seemingly simple as, you know, the animal looking at the disturbance source, and then the most severe form of disturbance is when the bird leaves the nest and flushes. And so that's pretty severe, since it puts, you know, the eggs and chicks in a vulnerable position. They can get predated, they can get trampled. So disturbance monitoring is something that we take very seriously, and we implement a lot of different management strategies to try to reduce disturbance. And in the long run, you know, if these rookeries are exposed to consistent long-term disturbance, it could lead to more detrimental impacts, such as the colony abandoning the site, you know, nest mortality, chick mortality. So it's a very interesting management position because you have such a big and diverse colony of birds nesting in the middle of a very dense urban area. And so it does lead to some unique management challenges. And then of course, you know, bird populations face all sorts of challenges, from environmental pollution to plastic ingestion to marine debris entanglement. So in the top photo, it's showing the oil slick from the 2007 Costco Busan oil spill that happened in the bay. And so that was a huge environmental impact within the bay, and especially for the birds. So I think I wasn't around then, but I know that it was pretty detrimental to the seabird population in general. And so a lot of the time we try to do outreach within the community to try and help with, you know, introducing plastics into the environment. We work with the Seabird Protection Network to do outreach to different boating communities and sailing communities. And I know Audubon does a lot of work as well, but you know, it's a tough battle. You know, we still see birds tangled in fishing line. We still see injuries caused by marine debris. So the birds are experiencing lots of challenges right now. And you know, why is Alcatraz important for the birds? Well, historically and presently, it's supported a lot of diverse seabird and waterbird life. And in the present day, you know, we have the San Francisco Bay, which is one of the more developed shorelines, and there's limited habitat throughout the bay. So Alcatraz is uniquely placed in the middle of the bay, and it provides some of the some limited habitat that, you know, these birds otherwise wouldn't have available. And it also provides great close-up viewing opportunity of all these different species and colonies that, you know, and it enhances the visitor experience. And, you know, like the Brandt's Cormorant, there's no other place in the bay where they nest in such numerous colony. So it's an important breeding site, and we just try to enhance their habitat and also protect them from ongoing disturbances. And I know with this group, we don't need to, you know, answer why are birds worth protecting. We all know that they have great value in our lives, from just having, you know, viewing opportunities to understanding that they're an integral part of the ecosystem. And so with the birds on Alcatraz, because they're facing, you know, the immediate threats of environmental contamination, habitat loss, and now with, you know, the threat of climate change, they require some extra protection and extra thought for, you know, to just, you know, maintain these populations for the future. A lot of these birds are also indicators of bay health. They subsist on marine life. So we know that if something's going on with their prey species like northern anchovy or other fish populations, and we start seeing a decline in their populations, we know that something's going on in the bay. And also, you know, it's the law. These birds are migratory birds, breeding birds. They're protected by federal and state law. They are covered by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so they have special protections there. And yeah, and so I hope you can come out to Alcatraz someday. The island is open. If you haven't been to the island, I highly recommend visiting. Now is a great time to come and see the different birds nesting and just to get a sense for how abundant and diverse the bird life is out there. So thank you for your time, and I'll pass it on to Zoe.
There were a few questions that we had that maybe we should, before Zoe starts. Some of them were about about cormorants, so I'll hold those. But there was a question.
Okay.
There was a question about how important Alcatraz is as a nesting site for the species, other than cormorants, who Zoe will catch, right? So.
Yeah, so it's also an important site for Western gulls. So I think that the population of Western gull is about 40,000, and you know, while they're locally abundant, their range is restricted to Western North America. And so aside from the Farallon Islands, Alcatraz is the only other large breeding site for them. And then we also have a large rookery of snowy egret, black-crowned night heron, and great blue heron. And so, you know, the number of rookeries throughout the bay is, I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are, but I know that with the black-crowned night heron, their habitat is pretty minimal within the bay. And so Alcatraz provides breeding space for them. And similarly with Pigeon Guillemot, their numbers aren't as well known throughout the San Francisco Bay. The large breeding colony is out on the Farallons. But you know, they do know that they come to Alcatraz and nest, and so it provides some habitat for them within the bay.
And for herons and egrets, their their nesting colonies move a lot. So it's really important. Every possible site, even if they're not nesting there this year, right, it's important to protect it for the future, because they don't nest in the same place forever. So we have an abundant colony there today, and maybe for the next decade or 2 decades, but they need to be able to move. And so it's really important that that every possible heron nesting site is protected.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just add some numbers to this too, to provide context on the abundance of different species. So the Brandt's cormorants, there's roughly probably 2,400 nests right now. And we're estimating maybe about 4,000 individuals on the island right now. With the gulls, on average, there's about 800 to 900 individuals. And snowy egret and black-crowned night heron are usually in the 70s and 80s with numbers of nests. And then the pigeon guillemots have close to 100 nesting sites on the island.
Those sound like important sites. Somebody else asked if there were more nests this year with fewer tourists there than in past years.
Yeah, so yeah, last year presented a really unique situation with the island being shut down for, close to a year. We saw that the Brandt's cormorants started occupying areas that they normally don't occupy. And it's probably because we didn't have visitor presence or people presence on the island. And similarly, this year, we're seeing them occupy those same areas and then extending a little more inland. So it's probably from, the island being shut down and not having people on the island. And it may also just be a really good breeding season for them. And of course, year after year with the cormorants nesting on the island, the population's just been growing. And so those same birds just continue to come back to the island and breed. So I think we're going to experience another record-breaking year this season as well.
All right. Well, let's let Zoe continue, and we'll come back to more questions at the.
All right.
Well, it was working before. Did we lose you, Zoe?
Zoe, it looks to me like you're muted.
Zoe may have frozen. Her image is not moving. Are you still with us, Lydia?
I am.
Right. Well, while Zoe's.
Well, I can, yeah, keep answering questions if you'd like.
So there was another question that I thought was a great one. I'll find it now. I thought Karen, as you all saw this, Karen, but Karen had a good point that now is a great time to go visit because it's nesting season with only 750 visitors a day. It's going to be a lot quieter than normal. Here we go. She's coming back. Here we are. Welcome back, Zoe. There we go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I had one of those rainbow spinning balls there. I couldn't do anything on my screen. So is everyone able to hear me now and hopefully see the blue slide?
Yes, you're good.
Awesome. Okay, sorry about that. I might have missed a little bit, but yeah, thank you for the introduction earlier, Glenn, and for that great background, Lydia. I'm doing a new thing where I'm trying these subtitles at the bottom, so I hope it works and is useful for some folks. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that presentation because I saw some images of the island that I have never seen before, and it was able to kind of piece things together. And I think, for example, possibly the photo on this first slide is the same area that was that big mound in that historical photo of cormorants, and it's been flattened out and changed quite substantially. So that was really interesting to see. So what I'm going to be talking about now is kind of a deep dive into the lives of Brandt's cormorants on Alcatraz, and hopefully, shed some light on their relationship to climate and some of the challenges they face, especially these days. But if you came here to get all of the answers, I probably won't be able to give them to you. It's a complicated story. But the cormorants themselves are really interesting, and hopefully you will see why. So the overview of the talk is I'm going to tell you about kind of some of their basic biology. Some of you may know this already, but like any good scientist, I feel like we need to know the basics before we can ask kind of more complicated questions. I'm going to go into a little bit about the methodology of how we go into the details of the cormorants, how we spend our time on the island, and then discuss some of the climate-related threats to them. So I think hopefully this will answer some of your questions about when to go see Brandt's cormorants. I wanted to share that, just see a comment. I hope everyone's seeing things okay. So the cormorants arrive to the island in February normally. You'll see this kind of pre-breeding behavior where males typically are gathering nesting material, doing this very silly display. I call it silly because I think almost everything Brandt's cormorants do is pretty silly. And they're trying to attract a mate. And once they successfully do that, they will lay eggs in their well-built nest once there's a nice nest bowl to take care of them. Cormorants will lay between 1 and 5 eggs. 5 is pretty rare, 1 is pretty rare. On average, it's around 3. Of those, several will hatch, not all of them, but they hatch into these, small naked chicks that kind of look like how you imagine a dinosaur would. And of those chicks, 2 to 3 normally survive. On average, the long-term average is 2 make it to fledging. So there's a lot of room for things to happen in the cormorant nesting season. I should tell you that the eggs are typically laid March, April, May, but this year was a very unique year. Lidia spotted the first eggs on March 3rd, and they might have been laid even a day or 2 before that. And the previous record was March 14th. So this is almost 2 whole weeks earlier than normal, which is really quite dramatic for an animal to adjust by that much. So their chicks are hatching in June, growing in July. Usually in August, a lot of the chicks have fledged, but there'll still be some lingering. So you can still go in August. That's when the flies like to come out. So, kind of earlier in the breeding season is when the birds are looking their best and where you might get a glimpse at kind of more action and more birds in beautiful breeding plumage. But in August, you might still see some. And by September, they're normally pretty cleared out. So this last photo is something pretty cool that happens on Alcatraz and not in any other place that we know of or that I know of for Brandt's cormorants. And that is called double clutching. So the cormorants have been observed to lay eggs, hatch chicks, successfully fledge those chicks, and then try to do it all over again. And this is a pretty unique thing for seabirds. Seabirds are long-lived and pretty kind of consistent in their breeding efforts. Like once a year, they make a solid attempt. If they don't do so well, they're long-lived, so they have more attempts in the future. So the fact that they're trying twice in 1 year indicates that they're pretty healthy. They have enough food. They have enough food to sustain themselves as adults, but also to, they think they'll be able to feed chicks. So that's a pretty cool thing. This is a photo from last year that I took. And unfortunately, right after I took this photo, the chaos of the adult, or the adult trying to feed a large chick that was begging and incubate eggs. It was just too much chaos, and the eggs got kicked out of the nest, and other cormorants came in and stole nesting material. So unfortunately, it wasn't successful, but it did happen. All right, so that's kind of the annual picture of the cormorants, and then they disperse for the winter and return the following year in February. So I thought I would give you a little glimpse into a day on the island for us, and a lot of it involves counting. So I thought I would just put up some pictures and give everyone, let's say a minute to count as many birds as you can. All right, ready? Okay, I'm just kidding. That was a joke because I think it would take a very long time to count all of these birds. But I wanted to give you an idea, just hopefully a little bit of shock and awe at how many cormorants there actually are nesting here. It's really impressive, especially in recent years to go, and I hope that you all can. I'm actually curious how many of you have been, but you're welcome to throw that in the chat if you want to. But it's a lot of birds to count, and it sounds like a simple task, but it's quite challenging, and actually gives us one of the most useful variables we have. So, you know, it's a challenge, it's time consuming. We do it many times throughout the season, but it gives us some really useful estimates that you'll see later. So the next main variable or parameter about the birds that we spend a lot of time trying to estimate is the number of chicks fledged per pair. And this requires a lot of detailed observation of specific nests. So I'm going to play a little time-lapse video for you that we haven't used specifically for nest collection or for data collection. This is just for kind of for fun, but I thought it was a neat way to show you how we collect data. So there's a yellow circle. You can kind of tune your eyes in on one nest that will be in that circle, and you can see if you can pull out any information. When are the birds showing up? What are they doing? How many eggs have they laid? I don't think you'll be able to get that one because the birds sit on them pretty tight. But eventually you'll see the chicks get up and grow and fledge, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. I might have spoken too soon. I think the video ends before they fledge because some things landed on the camera that I won't say what it is, but in a bird colony, you can imagine it gets pretty dirty. So you can see we're in February, and then we're March already. Nesting material, birds sitting tight. May, they're starting to act a little funny. Oh, it looks like it's sitting on something, and voila, we've got some big chicks growing up quickly in this time lapse. So we follow 200 nests around the island at least, and try to get to know them really well and measure, how many eggs hatch, how many of those hatchlings survive, how old do they survive to be, and those can all be indicators for us of how well the cormorants are doing. So what do we do with these numbers? So the counts we take, and we can use them to study change over time and look at patterns in the population. Lydia mentioned that the cormorants returned to the island in the early 90s. And this, happened probably for multiple reasons. The island was protected by the national park. It offered a quiet, safe place for birds to return and nest. But it also potentially had to do with prey shifting its location further inshore, probably anchovy populations. And with that, the cormorants found refuge on the island and substantial prey, so they decided to colonize the island. The population increased pretty steadily, pretty nicely, as you see, up until 2009. So in 2009, we see this pretty big drop in the population. The cormorants just didn't show up to breed, or a few did, but they failed. And this is really interesting, but it's also quite characteristic of Brandt's cormorants. We call it a boom or bust species. So that means in a good year in the California current, they are able to take advantage of the good year and really, lay a lot of eggs, fledge a lot of chicks. A lot of those adults are surviving throughout the year to be able to do this again in the following year. So that's a boom year, but that also comes with these bust years where they, all of a sudden don't show up and they're not able to breed. So I'll come back to that, but the population then returns to relatively stable. And then again in 2017, the population goes boom and back up to high numbers. And then in the most recent years, record-breaking numbers. So in that sense, now is a great time to visit the island because it is cormorant heaven. So then with the productivity data, what we call the productivity data of how many chicks are fledged per nest, we do the same thing. We get an island-wide estimate, And we look for patterns over time. Why are some years higher than the other? What's interesting about these two variables is they can be quite independent from each other. You can have a small population of birds that actually does really well with fledging chicks. You can have a large population of birds on the island, but they could fledge few chicks. So it's really important to kind of take both of these pieces of information and use them to, study why are some years good, others bad? Why are breeding attempts high, but then maybe fledging success low? So one of the most important drivers of these things, it probably doesn't come as a surprise, but it's food. Just like other animals, they need sufficient food, both to feed themselves as adults, but also to raise and fledge chicks. And I thought I would start kind of, the part of the talk that focuses on food with a video of the adult feeding some chicks. So if you haven't seen this before, it can be quite chaotic, a little dramatic. But I thought I would share that with you in case it's something you haven't seen before. So hopefully you can even hear. So just in case you didn't see the actual feeding event, I thought I would share this image of an adult feeding its chick. You're wondering where the chick's head went. It's inside the mouth. It's pretty impressive. And you may have noticed also that the chicks don't have many feathers on their heads. And that's for the same reason, that vultures and condors don't. It's they would get really dirty and be harbor for bacteria if they did. So this is why they don't. So they can feed this way. So how do we study diet? Some species, I wore my puffin shirt today, some species like puffins do make biologists' life easy by carrying the prey they're going to feed their chicks in their bills for us to see, for us to photograph, measure, visually and document. Cormorants don't do that. They swallow prey, regurgitate it for their chicks, and then feed it like you saw. So there's no chance for us to get a visual on it when it's happening, right? So what we do is we wait until the cormorants leave, normally end of August, September, and we go into the colony. This is Alcatraz. This is that big flat area where the birds were nesting and no longer are. And we go on our hands and knees and we crawl around and we look for these regurgitated pellets of hard parts that the cormorants have left behind for us. We also collect some of these old nest rings that you'll see. Those are also full of regurgitations and can be samples. And then we take those into the lab or anywhere we can sit with a microscope, and we'll pull out all of the bones and hard parts of interest. And these beautiful white bones you see on the right are fish otoliths, which are ear bones, and they're super valuable. They contain more information than you might realize. They can tell us, they're ear bones that can tell us what species of fish. We can estimate how big that fish was. We can, we don't do this in this study, but otoliths can be used to determine how old the fish was, just like trees deposit rings, otoliths do as well. And you can take a cross section and actually just count the rings. That's really incredible. There are also other clues in the otoliths. So that kind of golden spiky thing you see is preopercular spine, which is part of a sculpin. So if you find one of those, there was a sculpin. It worked out in this one because that longer otolith is in fact a sculpin. The other is a goby, so we can really learn a lot just from these regurgitated pellets of hard parts. Now, what are they eating? It's probably a question you have. So cormorants, kind of not surprisingly, just like those figures where there was a lot of variability, also have kind of a variable diet. Here is a figure that shows you 1 year's, only 2016, diet. I told you we collect nests and pellets, so there's one column for each, but don't have to worry about the details there. The overall take home is that, the main prey in this year were anchovy in the orange, small schooling pelagic fish, so in the water column that the cormorants will feed on, making up at least 40% of their diet this year. And then we have speckled sand dab in green. It's a small flatfish that you'll find in the bay. Then plain fin midshipmen, which are these fish up on the top image, which kind of look like giant tadpoles. I've seen a lot of gulls struggling to eat them, but they always succeed, as gulls do. It's one of the, I think, common gull sights at the dock on Alcatraz is you'll see a gull trying to get down one of these plain fin midshipmen. And then there's, other prey species that show up in small quantities. And this might look very different in a different year, this profile. But that is an example of one year. So I think we've maybe covered this enough already, but I thought it was worth having a slide. What are the important drivers for cormorant success, and specifically on Alcatraz? We know they need food, both to keep the adults alive and to have enough energy to transfer to their chicks so that their chicks can grow up and fledge. Cormorants also need undisturbed habitat. That's very important. Lidia talked a lot about that and the work we do to monitor them. Climate and weather play an interesting role because they can impact seabirds very directly, and I'll give some examples of that. But there's also this, very strong indirect effect that climate has on the food web and ultimately on the predators of the, the species lower in the food web that all those predators are relying on. So that's that arrow is. So to dive a little bit more into this indirect effect, again, I'm not going to give you all the answers, but I want you to, understand and recognize that there are really, huge impacts that both climate patterns and also smaller scale, weather and patterns have on seabirds. And you might be the most familiar with El Nino or La Nina, the ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation, as kind of this large scale pattern that impacts the California current ecosystems, mostly by having a really strong impact in the strength of the coastal upwelling that happens. And that is a process that brings up nutrients from the deep waters off the California coast. It brings up those nutrients to the surface, and they can kind of, kickstart and be used to, create a huge abundance of the lowest of the food web, which then triggers the larger food web. So that upwelling is really important, and the strength of that upwelling is really impacted by these large scale weather patterns. So, if you have a kind of understanding of oceanographic patterns are influencing nutrients and temperatures, you can imagine that is then, going up a level. Now we're thinking about the prey of the seabirds and how those fish and, other forage species could be impacted by those, really base processes like nutrients and temperature. And when you get to that level of thinking about the prey, it's not just thinking about how many fish are there. There are many details of how big are those fish? Are they really fatty and, juicy and good that year? Or are there a lot of fish, but they're actually, not that big and therefore not as, good for the seabirds? When is the fish available for the seabirds? I talked about their timing. If they don't have food that's available at the right time of the year, it's kind of not so useful to them, right? They need chicks, or they need food when their chicks hatch so that they can feed them, and the chicks need to be fed continually. And then also the location of the prey, kind of the same logic. If a seabird is, nesting on Alcatraz and there's tons of food really far offshore, that means that the cormorant would have to go to that location to get food to bring back to its chicks. So the food needs to really be available near the seabird colony. We call seabirds central place foragers. for that reason. They have a central place that they forage from. So it has a lot of restrictions and kind of, it's like constrains them to a specific area. So the food needs to be in the area at the right time and be sufficient in number and kind of size. So to go a little bit deeper into that, I'll give one example of the anchovy, which was shown by a study by our institution that the anchovy in the California current is the forage fish species that is consumed by the most predators. So that means it's a really important prey item for many, many, many predators, and cormorants are no exception. So this is a figure that shows 2 time series just on top of each other. So you can do the work to kind of see where they overlap and where they might not so perfectly. But the black line is anchovy biomass for the central stock of it. And the white line is the number of cormorant chicks fledged per pair on Alcatraz. So you can see that in the early years, there's really quite, they're both relatively high and the cormorants are doing pretty well. But then we again see this 2009 drop, right? So in 2009, the cormorants had really low chicks fledged per pair. It's a little bit artificial here because there actually weren't that many breeding pairs to begin with. But the take home is 2009 was not a good year for the cormorants. And you can see that that is the year that the anchovy dropped off. And then interestingly, if you go a little further in time, you follow that black line, a few more years, it stays low, and it stays low all the way into 2013. But when the anchovy population is still low in 2013, you can see the white line goes up, and cormorants actually had a relatively good year that year. It's like they produced more chicks on average than the long-term average. So that indicates it's a good year. So I share that because it kind of provides insight into some of the complexities of prey availability for these birds. We might think, oh, anchovy is really important. Anchovy is the main driver of these trends we see. But then you find these exceptions, and that shows that cormorants are able to switch and eat something else. Maybe there were a lot of sand dab that year, and they really, thrived on that sand dab. We're actually in the process of working up the 2013 diet samples as we speak. It's time consuming, so that year is not done, but it will be really interesting to see. So to tie this back to climate, you can imagine that, each of these prey species has its own relationship with climate, and climate might impact it in its own ways. So it really is, a complicated story to disentangle. And again, I'm sorry I can't provide more, specific insight into the role of climate, but anchovy are one of these forage species that is really, it's tricky to disentangle what's making them go up and down, and they do go up and down a lot, and it's a whole field in itself. And anchovy biologists have acknowledged the challenges in figuring out, what are the true drivers. And a lot of it's climate. There's also a lot of biological processes in there that are impacting the anchovy. But yeah, anchovy for cormorants are clearly very important on the island. But cormorants can still also, find other ways to, have decent years despite low anchovy. So to me, that offers, a bit of hope for resilience for these cormorants. All right, so to switch to the more direct effects of climate change on seabirds, and this is where I think we have the most kind of obvious evidence, and we can really see a lot of the effects of extreme weather on birds right in front of us. I'll give some more examples of that. But extreme weather events can impact adult survival for many seabirds out at sea. Sometimes seabird wrecks are just caused by large storms. I should say seabirds are really hardy. They do really well in tough environments. I've seen birds, puffins, fly straight into rocks and survive. So they do well because of their hardiness, but there is a threshold, and the same thing for chicks. They have thresholds that they are used to, or not used to, but the birds have evolved to kind of live within these norms. And so when weather events push boundaries and go outside of the norms, the birds just haven't evolved to survive those. And the two most obvious examples I have of that are on Alcatraz. I've witnessed really warm periods. So heat waves that are an extreme weather event. Both, I put a gull chick here because I have more data that shows the effects of heat waves on gull chicks. But both the gull and the cormorant species, the two main populations on Alcatraz, they're small downy chicks that are sitting in their nests as they grow, and they don't have any ways to thermoregulate besides panting like a dog. They can't leave their nests because there will be, neighboring birds that will attack them if they go in their territory. They can't cool down by getting wet because that would damage their downy coat or plumage. The adults might leave chicks unattended to cool down themselves, which again leaves them vulnerable to territorial neighbors or predators to come in and eat them. So a heat wave can be a very short-lived event, but the birds have not evolved to kind of, thrive within those extreme conditions. So they have, downy feathers to keep them warm, not to, it's kind of the opposite of what would keep them happy in a heat wave. So, in 2019, I have one value to share that there was a heat wave and it resulted in 58% of the gull nests that I was monitoring lost either an egg or a chick. Doesn't mean that all of them disappeared. It was just at least one egg or chick. So a lot of small downy chicks disappeared during that period, and they probably overheated and then, got picked off by predators and disappeared. So that's a hard one to observe. The other, little story I'm going to share to wrap this up is intense and, kind of atypically timed storms. Extreme weather events are expected to increase in frequency with climate change, increase in intensity, and also might be happening at irregular times that are a little bit outside of the norm. So specifically on Alcatraz, I think this can have a larger effect because the habitat has really been modified. And so, in 2019, we saw this large storm come through. And a lot of the island where the cormorants were nesting ended up getting flooded. And you might not see that as much on a coastal cliff colony where there's better drainage, but on Alcatraz, there were just puddles. And, it was heartbreaking to see nests in these puddles with chicks and eggs, essentially flooded and drowned. So it can also take away and reduce the nest contents, or the nesting material, which is an important part of this whole process. So I'd like to share with you a photo from May 15th of 2009. This is a happy cormorant colony. We have, maybe 500-600 nests right there. And they are probably mostly sitting on eggs or small chicks around the peak hatching. And then I went off the island, a big storm came through, there's a lot of rain. And a week later, there were many nests that had just completely disappeared. And of the nests that are still there, it doesn't mean that what the birds are incubating or brooding is still alive. A lot of eggs could be drowned or small chicks could have disappeared. So I'll just show you those again. We have before and after. So, to me, it's really visually kind of jarring and noticeable how many nests disappeared. The one estimate I have to share with you about this is that 30% of nests experienced lost. So not all of them disappeared completely, but 30% of the total island number experienced loss, either an egg or a chick. And fortunately, a lot of them came back and relayed, so that the population in numbers does look pretty high, but their overall the reproductive success. So the number of chicks that they fledged was actually substantially lower in 2019. So I think it was, we had high population numbers total, but low breeding success because of this event, also coupled with a heat wave. For the cormorants, it's really tricky to disentangle what birds died from the heat wave and what birds died from the storm, because they actually happened really close together. And I know the gulls did a better job surviving the storm, so I can attribute more of that loss to the heat wave. But yeah, 2019 was a year of extreme weather events, and to see two happen in such close proximity in very different directions, a heat wave and a heavy rainstorm, they were both, challenges for the birds. So that's where I'm going to end. And feels like a sad note to end on, but I think it's interesting to have witnessed these things and to keep in mind how they're going to be affecting the birds in the future.
Thank you so much, Zoe. There were a few questions. We back up a little bit here. Do you do any banding?
At the Farallon Institute, we do not currently. The challenge with banding cormorants is they, as you have now learned, are very susceptible to disturbance. So actually accessing nests to band them in itself would create such a huge disturbance that it could be, too much. I think maybe in 2002 or many, many years ago, there was one part on the island where previous biologists were able to sneak in and put a few tags on birds. But I think now, especially with the kind of expansive cormorant colony, and it's really hard to be sneaky to get in there because they can all see you. I think it's too hard to ban the cormorants. But Lidia does maybe can speak a little bit more to Pigeon Guillemots might be getting some bans soon. I'm not sure if that's the plan or if there's anything to share about that.
Yeah, so with the Pigeon Guillemots, I didn't include a photo of this, but so previous biologists and Point Blue had set up a research or a study area where they put out artificial nest boxes for the Pigeon Guillemots. And so I'm going to be collaborating with Point Blue this season, and we're going to be banding some of those nests with adult Pigeon Guillemots. And so we're going to be using light sensor tags, which will show how long the birds spend out in the open water, and it'll also help study their dispersal and non-breeding migration patterns. Basically, just want to know, where do they go after they're done breeding on Alcatraz. So yeah, that's in the works for this summer.
Exciting. I know also historically some Western gulls were banded as part of a tagging study to see where they were going, but unfortunately it's not a big part of the Farallon Institute work on the
island. Is the drought this year affecting nesting success?
I think the only way the drought would be well, I guess you could think of the opposite of heavy rainstorms. We haven't had any of those, so that's a benefit in a way to their breeding colony. There's probably some interesting relationship in the San Francisco Bay with how much fresh water is coming into the bay versus how much salt water is coming in from the ocean, and that interface, which determines what prey lives there, right? The fish have different habitat zones, and the San Francisco Bay is really cool in that those habitat zones kind of move depending on how much fresh water or salt water is coming in. So, it'd actually be really interesting to kind of couple the drought and the bay dynamics with prey, but that's something that hasn't been done yet, to my knowledge. So I can't answer that, but that's a good question. I asked this. I saw somebody asked about pelagic cormorants. I saw one at the beginning of this season, and they historically did nest on the island, but they too are very prone to disturbance and prefer the cliff habitat, which I believe has been eroding quite a bit over the years. So unless Lydia knows of any new updates, I don't think there are any pelagic cormorants.
Yeah, I've only seen one, maybe two on the western cliff face, but we did a boat survey recently around the island, and I didn't see any nesting activity by the pelagics where they usually are. But yeah, who knows, that maybe during the next boat survey I might have a few to count, but yeah, they're not as frequent or numerous as they used to be, probably due to changing habitat conditions and disturbance.
There's a question about how strong is fidelity to nest site and mates for Brandt's cormorant?
So as far as nest sites, they are not very fidelic, which makes kind of the island use pretty interesting. They can move quite a bit. I think there are, specific habitats that are maybe better, and you often see more experience. Probably we're seeing more experienced, better quality. That just means older, more experienced birds showing up to that habitat. We know that because they're always like where the first eggs occur, like the first occupied spot. So there's probably some site fidelity in terms of trying to get good spots on the island, but overall they can move a lot. They can, decide to completely abandon one side of the island and set up on another, or be more down on the cliffs or not. I think, there's also probably disturbance in there that's influencing some of these subtleties. They start nesting on the cliff, but maybe boats are coming in and disturbing them, so then they decide to move. But because they are so not fidelic, it's really challenging to determine what's caused their movement. I think sometimes they do return to the same mates, but they're not, actually I should have an estimate on that. They're not as mate fidelic as a lot of the other seabird species. I guess I'll say that. See.
There was a question about whether you've ever used drones to gather data on the birds.
So I don't know.
Drones are Zoe's favorite topic.
Well, the drones are, they're considered a predator to the gulls. So one single drone can bring 1,000 Western gulls up into the air off of their nests to attack that drone. And it, that disturbance creates a huge disturbance among the cormorants because they react to the gulls. And it's amazing what one drone can do and how big of a disturbance it can create. So they are not allowed over the island. And yeah, that's my feeling on drones. But I know a lot of other species, I've worked with penguins, and it's great to use drones to study them. They don't react at all. And then you get an amazing census of them. So it's species specific, but not on Alcatraz.
Let's see. We got enough for one or two more questions. Let's see. Right. So BLOY is the abbreviation for black oyster catcher, for those of you who don't know. I thought there was another interesting question here. Where we go? There was Tony said so. This is more of a question, but a comment than a question. But Tony remarked that, and Tony's an osprey watcher. So in 2019, there was also an unusually high frequency of nest failure among San Francisco Bay osprey nests that he thinks was also due to this timing of the same storms. So.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And Yvonne notes that in 2011, if you go back to your data on that even though the anchovies weren't so great in 2011, there was a huge herring spawn in Point Richmond and around the bay. So that might possibly explain too.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how much herring was in their diet that year. It's something we have the samples, but they haven't been sorted through yet. So thank you for pointing that out. Keep it in mind.
see. So here's a kind of an interesting question. I mean, that I think you could sort of elaborate on. Yvonne writes, a number of years ago, I noticed an entrapped cormorant in the middle of an active breeding colony on Alcatraz. I was told it couldn't be untangled because it would disturb the colony too much. Have you encountered that, and could there be a solution?
Yeah, that is a really hard situation, and I have seen it too. It's hard to communicate how sensitive the cormorants are. They are so sensitive that even if you peeked over the edge of a fence where they are nesting, they could abandon their nests and disperse, and in the process, trample other nests and kick eggs. So it's just too damaging to go into the cormorant colony at all. And that's why it's the management of the island and Lydia's job of keeping people away from those areas is so important, because those disturbance events are just so big. So you can imagine if even just peering over a fence causes that, going into the colony is just not possible. The only thing I think that can be done is, trying to remove potential things that birds get caught on in the winter when there are no birds on the island. I know I've done some work, fixing fences and putting sandbags across parts, and I know Lydia has done the same. And I think it's this constant challenge on Alcatraz because there's so many man-made structures and history, and those parts of the island are also protected. So it's a challenge to protect the habitat and make it safe.
There's a question about banding the guillemots. Mentioning a light sensor that was used in the banding, or
Yeah, so this technology is also new to me, and I'm collaborating with Point Blue Conservation on this project, and they're the ones spearheading the light sensor banding. So one of the biologists who works on the Southeast Farallon Islands has a lot of extensive experience using this technology and banding the pigeon guillemots out there. So we're just going to implement those same methods on Alcatraz and see what kind of data we get. But my very basic and limited understanding of it is that there are photosensitive detectors on these light sensor tags that basically log the amount of daylight that's exposed on the tag. And so you get a sense for, how I guess exposed the bird is throughout the day. And you get a sense for how long they're, sitting on the water or in flight. And pigeon guillemots being pelagic, where, we can see where they're going and what areas they're occupying with that data.
but you have to recover the band, right, in order to get that data.
Oh, yeah, and you have to recover the bands to process the data. So yeah, the following season, the hope and expectation is that most of these birds return and we're able to collect the tags.
There was a question about where cormorants go when they leave. So you can't track them since you can't band them very easily. So
yeah, so I mean, we know that they disperse offshore and kind of expand a little bit in their population, but specifically the birds on Alcatraz, we don't have an exact answer because we're not tracking individuals. It would be so great to do that.
all right. Well, I'd like to thank our guests so much for a really fantastic presentation tonight. And I hope all of you get a chance to visit Alcatraz. I know it's like putting it back on the top of my list. I haven't been there since 1976. So I think it's changed a little bit since then. But certainly there weren't any, I don't remember any cormorants on when I was there, but that was a wee thing. Anyway, I hope that you'll all join us next month for Eric Schroeder's presentation on Madagascar. I know it's a little far afield from our local conservation issues, but it should be a very fascinating talk. And we're thrilled to have Eric presenting. And we hope to see you in the field, online, and out birding. So have a great evening. And again, thank you to our guests, Lidia D'Amico and Zoe Burr. And thank you to Gateway National Recreation Area. No, Golden Gate, sorry. Oops, sorry. Ah, that was a New York slip there. Golden Gate National Recreation Area for allowing you to join us tonight. So have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
And for
you.
listening, everyone.